here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned. Immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of Trevor Johnson, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all the other groovy stuff. Has had an interest in life in music from a very early age. Was in various bands including Task Force and also the 15th, who brought out their single from 1989 on Bandcamp very recently. I'll put a link of that in the notes below, but you'll find out so much more in this fascinating interview. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Trevor, it's over to you.
Originally, I'm talking about 6-7-year-old.
Yes.
And I'd be sitting on the stairs with my older brother's dance set. Can you remember these boxes? Played mono.
Yes, absolutely.
And there was just a bunch of singles, and they included the Beatles, some 45s, the Supremes, The Happening, which I always remember, Dave Berry, Mama.
Right.
An Elvis album, which I can't remember what it was, and a 78 RPM disc, which was basically like sound effects of a storm.
Okay, that's quite
It's
random.
all quite vivid as my introduction to music.
Yes.
Basically.
Yeah, well, these things that we hear at that sort of age somehow sort of get ensconced in our brains, doesn't it? Really, I always think it sort of has quite a profound effect because my mum used to sort of being at home, listen to Radio 2, and she had sort of, I don't know, was it Jimmy Young in the afternoon with his "What's the Recipe Today, Jimmy?" and those kind of Radio 2 tunes of that period have always had a bit of a profound effect on me. I love the Carpenters and Burt Bacharach, really. So
yeah.
So that was
all the music for me, even though the house wasn't a very musical house, that's why basically I sat on the stairs with this dance set. The music wasn't played downstairs. I can't remember anything about that.
Right.
So this was just a moment on the stairs, little fascination, with these records where you could pile them up and play them one after the other.
Yes, I remember seeing that great excitement of them dropping down.
Even being so young, these records just have stayed vividly, And then from there, very much like yourself, I went into the 70s and there was just such a soundtrack going on, like leading into there. I always remember the song Stardust. Was this We Are Stardust, We Are...
Oh, We Are Golden. We got to go. Oh, so that's Joni Mitchell wrote it, Woodstock, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But it got covered by somebody else, which was all very exciting. Joni Mitchell would... Yes, I do remember it. It was some couple of geezers who did that Woodstock song. I'll tell you what it was, because frankly, it'll just irritate us now, won't it?
But songs like that, they just seem to be there. And then, just like yourself, leading into the Sweet,
Yes.
T-Rex. And basically, T-Rex was because I had an older cousin, female, who was very much into T-Rex. So my memory about that was like New Year's Eves, where she and friends would be dancing to T-Rex in the house. And that was always like fascinating as a youngster, like watching these older with the big flares on and the big hair and
just
everything. Music just seemed to capture something for me. I don't know. Even though I was really loving football as well, I was very much into me football at the time, but this music really captured.
Yes.
Something.
What was your team that you supported?
Well, even though it was always kind of Newcastle, locally, I had a thing for Leeds United.
Right. Well,
at the time,
Don Revie.
Of the Don Revie period, like Alan Clark,
Mick Jones,
Paul Madeley, Mick Jones, Trevor Cherry, everybody. So for a few years, they were kind of his second team.
Yeah, so you must have been delighted. No, they did. They lost against Sunderland, didn't they? That must have broke your heart.
I think round about that time, I wasn't too bothered. It seemed to come after that.
Right.
So that one, I can remember I didn't even watch that match. I was at the baths, the swimming baths.
Right.
I can remember vividly that day of just not watching it. I can't understand why, but it didn't.
Well, the FA Cup was such a big thing. We used to start watching it at sort of 10 in the morning.
We did, yeah.
Some random sort of, I don't know, it's a knockout competition. And
Exactly.
then many moments of just kind of killing only 6 hours before the kickoff.
Yeah, I went through that.
So that was the next year was when Liverpool beat Newcastle, didn't they? 3-0.
I think that's when I was like really watching it.
Oh, you would have had Malcolm McDonald, wouldn't you, at that stage?
We had high hopes then, but I think one of the games, I don't know if it was that one or the Manchester City one, which came the year after, where the whole team went downhill or something.
Oh, was that when they lost in the League Cup final against
Man City? Yeah.
And Dennis Chewett scored that overhead kick, didn't he?
Yeah, ex-Sunderland.
Right, yes, God, it was... yeah, well, it's interesting because, all those memories are sort of, again, like music, are just sort of very wedged in the mind that you just can't ever... when I'm 10 or 20 years older, in a care home, I'll be able to remember that whole sort of the Leeds team from that period, actually. Because I sort of used to sometimes go to the Ipswich matches where they would play Leeds and Liverpool at that period of time. So Ipswich were always coming second or third, and Leeds and Liverpool were always coming out on top at that point. Yeah. So it was all very dramatic. Yes, and also I think with the music scene, I think because one had to sort of struggle to get it, it seemed very precious actually somehow. Because we didn't get a record player in our house until the sort of early 70s. I think when my parents got married in the 50s, I think they sold everything because they didn't ever borrow money. So they didn't have any possessions at that point. And then slowly things appeared in the 70s, including this record player. And they had some terrible records, but like country and western and the great TV themes and war, the soundtracks to those war films like the 633 Squadron and the Battle of Britain. I don't know. They must have gone to the supermarket and went, oh, we must get some records.
Music for Pleasure.
Music, yes.
Was that the label, Music for Pleasure?
It probably was, yeah. And it was just, and I guess we grew up with things like those films from the sort of the 60s, I guess, weren't they? The 633 Squadron and The Great Escape, and it was always very dramatic music. So, it got played to death, actually. But like you, I had a sort of an older brother who had sort of his record collection that he started getting, and I became obsessed with prog rock at that stage. So it has to happen, doesn't it? So when you were at school, then was it swimming in football and an interest in music?
Yeah, what are we talking about here? Like the junior school or heading into the...
Well, I suppose coming from the age of 11, we then went to sort of a modern school, which then got turned into a high school, actually.
Well, this is where music really kicks in. I mean, I know I've like dabbled there just as an introduction as to music did mean something, but nothing great as such. It was there. And I really enjoyed music, like the music of the shows or what we call the fun fair.
Yes.
As you're spinning around on the rodeo or the waltzer, all that chart music blasting was, all of that was like great. But it's going to be a cliche. But in 1977, I heard the Sex Pistols.
Right.
Right. As a young kid, I was still 11, sort of going on 12. And a friend of mine had just you remember the sort of mono cassettes?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, the little sort of rectangle things that used to be able to record.
Yeah. You press record and you'd hear your voice. You could record your voice. That was a fascination for us.
It was a massive fascination.
Yeah.
And
sometimes you got a microphone with one to plug in. And again, I remember his was an ITT one.
Right.
I know
Okay.
that sounds very train spotting, but like, so just hearing, you know, he had a couple of Sex Pistols tracks on there, Anarchy in the UK, obviously, and I don't know if anybody else has ever been able to explain, but as a 11-year-old kid, you know, like, it just seemed right. It was
Yes.
like, this is it, you know, because before then, yeah, we liked a bit of glam, and I liked a bit of synthesizer music as such. But then this sound just came through, and I'm sure there's a million people that can say the same thing, that it really was like from another world. It was a new chapter, this one, and
Yes.
you know, just being so young didn't matter. It was This was it, and so from that point, and he introduced me to friends from school who were also listening to this for that whole year. You know, it was just an introduction through. Started buying the sounds, the NME, and just every week was new bands, new records. I was introduced to John Peel very early on.
My God, you're a very early adopter
Really,
of this.
it really. I think we all just sort of jumped on it and
Yes.
really took hold of it, and it just became so exciting.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Were you more from a city than the countryside?
It's what you call like a rural town.
Right.
What
So,
it- what what it is in this area, if I can give anybody kind of a definition of it, is the northeast was uh, mostly like built around pits, mines.
yeah.
So there was hundreds of those. So all your little villages and towns were basically built to house the workers as such. So we were in, you know, what was now becoming like deindustrialized. So we'd lost the industry really. We were just sort of hanging on to the last. Concert Steelworks was still going then, but in a few years that would be closed as well. Um, so yeah, it's kind of a small town, and this is
Yes.
where I'd always introduce people to a term called small town England, which I don't know if you know New Model Army, but they had a
Yeah.
track called that, and it summed the place up perfectly. Small town mentality, you know.
Okay, because I kind of, so I grew up in a country. I kind of grew up in a village, so it was much smaller than, yeah, those local towns that were possibly similar size to what you were talking about. But
Mhm.
yeah, so I didn't. I mean, though I'd heard of the Sex Pistols, it was a few more years before I actually heard a song by the Sex Pistols, and
Right.
so I think culturally, I felt quite, looking back, quite backward, really. I mean,
Mm.
because it was mostly, like my brother had his prog rock thing, but most of the other kids were into, it was rock, it was status quo, it was
Yeah.
Black Sabbath, it was Deep Purple, and discos. They would have discos in village halls,
Yeah.
and it was like disco music, and then they would have a bit of, someone would put on heavy rock for half an hour, and the young men, boys with their denim jackets and leather coats and all that malarkey would stand around in a circle,
Like
either shaking
shaking
their
their heads.
heads or having their thumbs in their, and doing that funny thing that you saw. I suppose it was Susie Quattro, kind of most peculiar. It was like you could imagine some commentator talking about it as these species of human beings with their mating rituals. It was a bit
Yeah.
like looking back on it, but they would have that for half an hour between some disco song.
I have
Um,
to admit, the Northeast was even, I can remember now, even leading into the 1980s, was predominantly that sort of type of person in denim and long hair and into rock music.
yes,
So, like being into punk, you really, really stood out. Early on, you did, and even into the late 70s and into the early 80s, before this, what we now term the second wave. Before then, you were still sort of very sparse, like
yes.
as
Well,
creatures.
Well, a lot of kids were leaving school as soon as they could, just after Christmas, when they were getting into that last year when they were 16, and just going to the chicken factory or the
Hmm.
jeans factory, or sort of getting a job in the pig farm. You know, it was that kind of ambition. There wasn't much ambition on the career front, really. You know,
No,
it was very much like that. It was
yeah.
get a 50cc moped when you're
Hmm.
16, then get a 250 when you're
Yeah.
17, and then, you know, just go to the pub on a Friday,
This
Saturday.
is very, very similar to where I'm coming from. It must have been um, a national thing, really.
Yeah. I think, you know, I often think, God, the careers teachers must have had a really easy time during that time, because it must have been like, well, you're not going to get any qualifications. You can just leave school straight away and you can just get a job down at the chicken factory and, you know, gut some chickens, really. It was really horrible.
I mean, we had like careers at school, and basically what they do every year is bring out this list of companies for you to apply for a job.
Right.
It was the same companies year after year after year, and you didn't stand a chance, or a milk round or something like that.
Yes.
They didn't. Honestly, I don't think people appreciate that they didn't offer you any kind of hope whatsoever,
No, it was hideous, actually. So
and it
then
got
when,
worse.
you know, it did get worse, because then 79, Thatcher
Yeah,
gets in, doesn't
and that's
she?
when we were leaving school, kind of just after
Yes.
that, as such.
So we had the Falkland War,
Hmm.
Greenham Common, and then the miners' strike. So when you hit 16 in the early 80s, I mean, obviously there was the punk period, then there's a bit of post-punk. The new romantic world had started to
Hmm.
develop, and electronic. So so where do you go when you're 16? What's your next move at that stage?
Oh,
Do you-
I stayed with punk from the age, like I say, of 11. We were there during the 77 period, and we even sort of were mentored a little bit by the older punks. We kind of hung on their coattails, so you could get the gigs and that with them.
Right.
Somebody that could take you to the city hall in Newcastle and watch the Buzzcocks and
So what was your first gig you went to?
um, Eddie and the Hot Rods.
Classic. Do
And even
anything.
though now we look back and say Eddie and the Hot Rods weren't punk, but at the time they looked the part. They had the leather jackets. I mean, people were even listening to the Boomtown Rats. That was classed as punk, really. And
Yes, it was
in
very.
retrospect, I'd rather not. But
But
yeah, so
it seemed a little bit radical compared to everybody else on Top of the Pops at that stage. And
it didn't take much. I mean, you had even into '78, you had bands like Tonight, the Drummer Man, if you remember that.
no, there was some very strange kind of
I
naff
mean, this
songs.
wasn't punk. Like, what I'm trying to say is that, like, anything that was just a little bit edgy was thrown into this. Whether we're calling it new wave by then,
Yes,
and people just wore sort of straight trousers and skinny ties, and you were a punk. But they
yes.
weren't really.
No, but then, you know, I just remember that thing about the tribalism. I mean, you just couldn't look or appear to enjoy anything by two-tone and mod stuff. Again, that would have got you beaten up and threatened for being a sissy or something. You know, it was definitely, you just had to be very kind of cautious and aware of what you omitted. And I, you know, punks just, it just never happened in East Anglia, in that part of East Anglia. I just
Right.
think it, you know, it's almost in looking back on it. I mean, you realise that heavy metal becomes quite conservative quite quickly with a lot of their attitudes, whereas punk is kind of a bit more chaotic and bit more connected with anarchy and stuff like that, which again it's kind of, it's quite a different mindset, really. I mean,
Mhm.
it might seem small, but I think it's also quite a massive difference of people. um, and just even the way the songs being, you know, so short and snappy without any
Mhm.
guitar solos or
Yeah.
drum solos, and sort of, I don't know, all the thrust in, you know, Robert Plant look and the machiness. There was no, you know, it was a very macho quality being into heavy metal, really, and being tough.
I think people into rock music because, like, there were some sort of guys same age at school that were into the Led Zeppelins, the Black Sabbaths, Deep Purples. Um, because you'd have this banter going on between you, because they just snarled at like sort of the punk tunes like as if they were noise, compared to the musicianship of their Jimmy Pages and John Bonhams.
Yes, it was.
So they always try to make you feel inferior, but that inferiority, I don't know, it felt even better because you were really rebelling. Even as young as that, you felt like you were really rebelling.
Yes,
And
well,
I don't know what
absolutely.
we were rebelling against. Don't It's this funny thing as a like 11, 12, 13-year-old. Is it just like this innate thing in you that you come of age and you just start rebelling? I don't know what it is, but
Well, it's quite. I mean, I think it seems quite normal, natural. There's a great line, isn't there, in the Marlon Brando in The Waterfront, where he's in the bar and the woman comes up to him and says, "What you rebelling against?" And he says, What have you got?"
yeah, exactly. Don't think you realise that till later, though.
Yes, it's just like,
At that time, I think just whether it's all is it the hormones and everything else that's going on, you're trying to find your way in the world. And I think for a lot of people through the ages, music's done that for you.
yeah. And it seems like completely impossible because you want to leave home, but you don't know how you're going to leave home because
Mm,
you haven't even got, more than a couple of quid in your pocket. It all seems completely like impossible.
yeah.
How you're going to do anything in the world seems completely impossible. And everybody seems like they've got loads of money and have got something sorted. And you feel completely like you're just going to live under a park bench,
Mhm.
and hope for the best, really. It's kind of weird. But then being in Northeast, you obviously had a lot of access to gigs. But didn't you had the Tube was that in Newcastle? That started.
It was the ITV studios in City Road, and that was more. I don't know whether it started in '83 and
It was
through the
around,
'80s.
yeah. So did you ever go to any of those shows or go to the studio?
I didn't, but like I know people that did, and the ones that I knew had to go for an audition as such. So they went to a local nightclub called Tiffany's,
Right.
and
Sounds fun.
basically they had this night set up, and people had to dance. And I think the producers of the program probably looked out for some interesting people. And at that
Right.
time, there was, like the dress sense was, we're talking post punk here, and there was a lot of different alternative looks. There wasn't
Yes.
one uniform. You had the punk look, and then the what became like a bit of a gothic look, but it really mixed it up. There was nothing sort of uniform as such. It was quite varied. And so I think
Yes.
these people really, if you look at the audience in the tube, it does look interesting.
Yeah, I always remember they did seem sometimes when I've watched clips, they often look quite bored until bands like The Mission were there, or I think New
Yeah,
Model Army. There was some,
because
or The
they
Smiths.
wanted to be there for a particular band, but they would
Yes,
put up with the rest of them, like just to be on that show.
yeah, I do
But even
remember.
before then, we had shows called All Right Now. Have you ever heard of that?
Well, I've been recording that series that Guy Garvey did on Sky Arts, which is now free, and he's or whoever who puts the program together has got all these regional shows that came out in the 80s or 70s actually,
Late 70s.
and there were some from the northeast as well as some from Manchester and London, which obviously I didn't see at the time, and
Yeah.
he's compiled these kind of this series of programs shows,
I
and
think
it's
these were the first ones to like invite a young audience in, that's all.
yeah.
And I remember the Clash being on one, and there was a lot of like guys there that I recognised, from Newcastle as such, older guys
Yes.
that are getting in, just sitting amongst the banders who were being interviewed, and then they played a couple of tracks. I think Tommy Gunn was one of them, so it was around about that time.
Right. So that was,
And
yeah.
I think that was all right now, but there was also something else which I don't know if that went around different regions. And then
Yes.
there was Check It Out. There's an infamous clip with Public Image Limited where they walk off. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
It seems familiar, but then they always seem to be walking off or being stroppy in interviews, don't they? It's a
Oh,
tricky.
definitely. I mean, you look back at that now. At the time, you thought John Lydon was speaking for you and like being just a bit rebellious, but you look at it now and you just think he's a bit. I can't think of the word, but like quite immature, really, which obviously he was. And I think he
Yes.
still is. I think he thinks he's something he's not. I've never
Well,
like
yes. Well, having grown up being obsessed with the Smiths and Morrissey, I mean, you can tell that it's been a bit of a difficult time in later life, dealing with some of those sort of little things that people say, which you kind of think, I'm not sure really.
mm,
Yeah, like you say, it's not really like, God, you've really thought this through and it's going to be a really good idea. It's like, yeah, some of the, I mean, yes, you can say things that provoke the liberal left and all that, or just seem to be radical. But yeah, there's a sort of fine line, isn't there, between being a kind of a clever radical and
yeah,
being a bit of a
yeah.
dickhead, really.
But I think that's the thing with probably both Morrissey and John Lydon. In their heads, they think they are philosophy kings. I really do think that,
Yes,
and they're
yeah,
not.
I agree. They think that yes.
I think they've both got like issues, and the fact is, I mean, with Lydon especially, he basically, by the time he was 19, he was in a band. So for me, he's never really been in touch with the streets, which is what he claims even now. And he's lived in LA, I think, for decades. And he
But
still
yeah,
talks about my England,
yes. Well, Morrissey's a
and
bit the
Morrissey
same.
does the same thing.
I
So
know.
they've both got this thing about, yeah, they look back to an England that they remember, but like, um, I don't know, they seem to have a nostalgia for something that is it really worth being nostalgic over, like
Well, I
the
think
3-day week and,
yeah. Well,
you
I
know,
think Jello Biafra did a sort of one of an album. There was a song called I don't know, something about nostalgia that never existed. Because I mean, Manchester in the '70s wasn't great, and London in the '70s wasn't particularly great. I mean,
yeah.
they didn't have a lovely life, but somehow they've reconstructed it to say things like the community spirit was so much better in those days. Everyone knew each other, and you thought. And you
It
think,
wasn't.
even friends sort of reminisce a bit about the '80s. I can't remember us all jumping up in the morning being happy. I thought
No,
we sat
no.
around moaning a lot. I mean, the soundtrack and the music was good, but I can't remember anybody being particularly happy. We were,
I think with the onset of Facebook and the likes, social media, people are just sort of pummeling it with photographs. And photographs for me are of a second, not even of a moment, but of a second. And who knows what was going on around that second.
yes,
It looks exciting. And all I can say to anybody young who looks back and think, you do hear the voice where they say, "Oh, I wish I was there. I wanted to be there."
yes, Jesus
And I want to.
Christ.
I just want to say to those people, honestly, most of the time we were hanging around bored, and we were suffering from abuse. This is the thing about being a punk. I kind of called this small town England, and the mentality really came through because even as probably when we were like sort of 13, 14-year old, you dressed like we would dress, and you would be physically attacked by grown men coming out of the pub and that. A little bit of drink on them, and they just look at you. And this wasn't helped by media, who portrayed the punks as the folk devil. And I think it
Yes,
was like a justified target. It didn't matter how old you were. Again, it's just so different from then to now. Um,
yes.
just the fact they thought they could get away with it.
I know, it's kind of weird, wasn't it, really? Yeah, that was kind of strange. I think the other thing, just on that Morrissey and Johnny Lydon and stuff, I think it's like being at a point in life where those people, it's a shame they never really did any. work and process some of their own stuff internally before being so external. But I think it's like also dealing with they're not really relevant anymore. And I think that probably churns them up every day. It's like people aren't that bothered. So just coming out saying, yes, I think Donald Trump is marvelous. And you think, well, I suppose that kind of would possibly wind me up. But I do, like you said, it's like, it's not really.
I know.
Are we, is the legacy going to be that brilliant? Is it really that good, really? Johnny?
I mean, what amazes me is that the amount of people who are still basically idolize and worship these people. I mean, again, punk to me was, well, basically like you shouldn't have any heroes as such. And I've grown up learning not to have, and it's helped me as well. I'm not saying sort of musicians are bad, but I used to do something similar to what you're doing. I did like an internet radio show, and I did do interviews.
Right.
And I wanted to get to the human side of it rather than just what was your greatest gig and this and that. And it was really interesting to get there. But it was also through that and through putting some gigs on and such, finding out about musicians and like sort of how some of them, about their egos as such, the kind of think there's something that they're not, even sort
Yes.
of 40 years later or something.
Yes. Well,
They kind of live off the back of, and people give it to them as well, with his adulation. And I don't get it. I really don't get it.
No, it's strange actually. Yeah, so as the 80s progressed, and obviously, as I mentioned, we had those early 80s was kind of very grim because it was the sort of not Chernobyl, that wasn't quite then. It was Greenham Common, the
Yeah.
potential of sort
Oh,
of
that was,
nuclear.
yeah, we were completely around all that.
And then
Because for me,
there was obviously the miners' strike, which was kind of just
yeah,
endlessly, and then there was the odd, I don't know, bombing in Brighton, wasn't there? And yes, and then Thatcher became incredibly powerful because of the Falkland War, which went terribly well for her, which was
yeah.
marvelous. Just to set
I
the
mean, that
80s.
that was
Yes,
the war. I mean, I don't know where I'm going here. We're kind of jumping around, but sort of, I was still like a punk. Sort of, as punk faded, it kind of faded originally, from the 77, 78, and we started seeing people sort of. There was a mod revival for one,
yes,
so a lot of people sort of just latched onto that, or they started going to the football. So there was fewer and fewer punks sort of being left behind, or it was like mostly people like us who were a little bit younger, and we were still hanging on to it. As you were getting older, there was still bands kicking around, so it still meant a lot to us. We kind of really took it on board as more than just another musical trend, where for some people it was very much like that. It was just this week's fashion.
yeah,
But for us, because, like I say, because of where we're coming from, this small town England kind of, it was just ideal, to like to be able to sort of express yourself through this, through how you dressed and the music you were listening to. Because by
yes,
then, we had cassette players, and you'd walk around with your cassette player, and you would be playing your music, and it felt great, because you felt like you were winding people up by playing this loud, fast music in
yes.
public.
So did you on with that punk? I mean, it started well, but then it sort of not ends, does it? But you start getting. I don't know if you ever see punk at the BBC, where I remember seeing those clips, and I found it quite depressing actually, because actually a lot of the bands just looked like they were just blokes in a rock band, especially the backing, like the bass player or the drummer, who obviously just got the gig, like. They don't even particularly look punk. That's the strange
No,
thing about some of them. They, and
I
when
think I think you realise it not at the time. Like I say, you would listen to anything that was just a little bit edgy, you know, and you weren't taking too much notice of what they were looking like too much, Like I mean, the Jam had suits on, it didn't matter because the modern world sounded loud and fast and
Yes.
good. You know, I mean, Champ 69 didn't look punk, you know, but it sounded it. And then there was lots of other bands um, who, yeah, they looked the part, but they looked older. And it wasn't until years later you realised that these had already been in bands beforehand. They taught you that anybody could like form a band, but the truth is, most of this original 77 Brigade were musicians that just latched onto the current sort of trend.
Yeah.
But what you found when they started looking for chart success or whatever, you know, like getting themselves on Top of the Pops and the likes, um, they were becoming. It was all becoming like new wave. This wasn't punk. But then out of that, you had like they were allowing bands to go on Top of the Pops. So around about 79, you had the Ruts, UK Subs, Stiff Little Fingers. But that's all mainstream. But we were still finding all these young bands that were still coming through. So to us, punk was still very much alive. We were hanging on to it, and we
Yes.
were starting to like form bands ourselves, like playing in youth clubs and such, you know, just doing covers. But punk like give you that like license to give something a go, you know. You know, none of us had any musical experience whatsoever, but you just thought, you know, I could play one string,
Yes. So
making
did
noise.
you pick up an instrument at that stage?
I tried the drums, and with that, did join my first band, and sort of it was noisy. That's all I can say.
Right.
And what we did, we rehearsed in the youth club, and we arranged one gig. I remember this, you know, like sort of we did the whole arranging and arranging our own stage where we would walk about a mile and a half along a railway line to pick up pallets, these wooden pallets, so we could build our stage. So we were
Fantastic.
really keen to get this thing going. You know, we would like sort of each night we would like be dragging a few of these pallets over from this old factory and just to be ready for this gig that we were going to put on a Thursday night.
My God, that sounds like a sort of a clip from a Cinema City film, one of those art cinemas.
It felt, yeah, I know what you're saying, and it felt like that. This is what was really exciting about it. You know, the music was out there that we were listening to, but the fact that you could do something yourself, you know, it was like quite liberating, as we can say now. You know.
Well, absolutely. No, it's good. So by the mid-80s then, were you still sort of yes, had your musical taste changed at that stage? You know, it's kind of
I think what I can say, and again with the help of John Peel, and I always like to throw in Stuart Henry as well. Is it Stuart Henry? Was it Stuart Henry and Radio Luxembourg Street Heat?
oh, right. No, I didn't really listen to Radio Luxembourg during that
Yeah,
time.
well, see, everybody speaks. I like to point this out whenever I get the chance because everybody speaks about John Peel, which is fantastic. You know, he
Yeah.
was the person to go to. But round about 1977, 78, I think I'm sure it's Stuart Henry, um, had a show called on a Sunday night called Street Heat, and the sort of music that sort of introduced it was the modern world. I always
Right.
remember that. This is the modern world. That's what he'd like play in between the songs. Um, so yeah, I just thrown that one in because like everybody just speaks of John Peel, but Street Heat was important to me as well because they'd be playing the same type of music. Well, it was all punk. What he was punk and new wave, where John Peel would still be playing folk music, reggae, um, what else? Anything. he was still playing music off the early 70s as such, you know.
Right. God, I'm just looking at him now. Blimey. So he then, yes, Radio Luxembourg. My God.
Am I right with Stuart Henry?
Yeah, there is a Stuart Henry. There's a Wikipedia page about him. Apparently, he was a regular presenter on Top of the Pops
Right, I can't
not
remember.
between 1967 to 69. So we didn't hear that at all. So yeah, so then he went on. Oh, it was around. He got sacked in 74 and then went on to Radio Luxembourg the following year.
Right.
Yes. Oh
But
God.
yeah, just like I said, I just thought I'd throw that in. But John Peel, something about if you went from punk, and there was many people very similar to me, certainly friends, that listened to John Peel nightly, 4 nights a week it was, 10 till midnight. Didn't matter about school the next day, you know, or the paper round that we'll be doing. You would listen to it, or you'll be ready with your record button if he was going to
Yes.
play something new, because he did every week. There was just so much music coming through. But punk was kind of, to us, it was evolving. So yes, you had what you would class as punk bands, but then by 78 you had bands like the Pop Group who would be playing like a mixture of sort of jazz, funk, punk,
Yes.
if you've ever heard that term. But
Yeah, it was quite dubby at times, wasn't it? The pop group.
yeah. So you come through that, and then you had power pop, and then electronic. Yeah, the Human League would come through being boiled as such. That was different.
Well, that's I
And then
guess
all these other bands.
Sheffield had their scene, which was quite electronic, and then
It was.
Leeds also had the bit of a goth. They had the post punk like the
It was
Mekons
the
and
Gang of Four, Delta Five, and such, wasn't it?
yeah, the Three Johns.
That all came out of the university, I think.
Yeah, there was a very popular
Yeah,
or
very like
famous
artsy.
art school. So but then they had the goth scene, and then Bradford had the 1 in 12 club, didn't they? Which
Yeah, that Southern Death
obviously
Cult and New Model Army as such.
so
So I kind of went along with all of this. This is what I'm saying about like music wise. Everything that was coming through John Peel was still it was punk to me, even when it wasn't punk, because by then we were like evolving into what we call the second wave, and that includes like the likes of Crass. Who do you remember Crass?
oh
Are you
yes,
familiar?
dear old Penny and
I
Penny
mean,
Ray.
they kind of introduced the anarcho scene as such, and then you had the Exploited Discharge, who came with a much more hardcore sound. But by then, the punk was fragmenting into two different camps. So you had the anarcho, who had quite a hippie spirit, and for us, even though like I was very much into Crass, I'd heard of them before they'd even released a record. So you know, like I was ready for them when they released Feeding of the 5,000.
Right.
So I got that, and with me, I'm very much like on the moment of something like when it comes out. But if they repeat the formula too many times, like I only want to hear it sort of a couple of records, and if the third record's just the same, it's like, right, I think
Yes.
you're stuck here, you know. I like things when they're just fresh and they come out. Like Discharge for me was the same. Even though I could be listening to Being Boiled by the Human League, with you know, I could still listen to Realities of War by Discharge. And I don't know if you've heard that, but it was more punk than what the '77 punk had been. It was
Right.
noisier, it was louder, and this is what the kids in this next kind of wave were looking for, because you had a different type of punk coming through. You had the kids really from the council estates. Like the first one was more your art student punks. They were older. Some of them were in the 20s, even 30s in bands at that
Yes.
time. But once you hit into the 80s and you had the Discharges and Exploited, all of a sudden you just had so many more bands come up, and they really did include the ordinary kid from the council estate, and that included us as well.
But you had that kind of, I don't know if you had it, but Norwich had sort of the chaos punks who were particularly destructive, but also started to lean to the right quite a lot. You know, they were sort of slightly slipping into, you know, by the title of chaos punks, you know, had the real sort of Mohicans, but they were
Mhm.
quite, some of them quite a nasty bunch who
I
you,
think, yeah. I mean, that is another topic that is worth talking about, because I don't think a lot of people realise this. But what I would say about that, I'd totally agree with you, because again, I was going to say, coming into this second wave, I think, as well as it included a lot of genuine kids who were so into punk, I think it also brought along a lot of what you just call yobs,
yes, there was,
who took advantage of, here's this violent sort of scene we can get involved in. And I think, young kids, again, we were talking about hormones and being rebellious. And I think a lot of them wanted somewhere to like let off steam. And I think a lot of them jumped on this, and they did start dressing up, and I found it like it was starting to become competitive with these mohawks and such. It was like who could get the tallest one,
yes, the spiky
and who could
mohawk.
put the most studs in the leather jacket, and who had the most badges. And I don't think people appreciate this now. Like sometimes I could be accused of being quite sacrilegious because I'll critique punk, but still love it because it was my formative years.
Yes.
But I believe I've got the right to critique it because it is there to be critiqued, and that is one of them. The criticism that I've got is that a lot of people who joined it at that time didn't really get punk. They
No.
didn't know what it was about. They'd read the papers, and they were still being Sid Vicious in the 80s. He had died a few years before, and they were still going around acting like Sid Vicious, which was
Yes.
ridiculous anyway. He was a clothes horse. That at the end of the day, the poor guy
Yes.
was used,
Yes.
and suffered his fate. Like,
I do remember because when they were in the studio recording, I guess, something. I remember Queen were in at the other part of the studio, and they did sort of
yeah,
sum him up, saying he wasn't the brightest spark we ever met. and Freddie saying, calling him Sydney, hello Sydney, and
yeah,
him being a bit confused about how to react to it. But I also, so there was also that period of the 80s. There was also, I don't know if you had it in your area, but there was Travellers, the Convoy, those buses.
I,
There's
I
that
think
that
that
kind
came a
of,
bit later.
so there was a kind of a real movement of that, as well
Yeah,
as a lot of special brew, and I
yeah.
suppose the drugs started getting
I
from sort
think
of
I think the scene
fun
you're talking about kind of it. I think it became known as crusty,
crusties.
and I
Yes,
think that came out of the anarcho side.
yeah,
Because if I can explain about how I seen punk at that time as well, I found that the crass, the anarcho side became like a cult. They all dressed in black. Their one spiky hair started to fall, and it was matted. You know, it,
yes,
it grew and it became matted, and they just had this uniform where you had to wear black, and there was too many rules. It was ridiculous when you total contradiction when you think these were supposedly anarchists, and they had so many rules. And the type of people we were at that time, we were still very rebellious punkies, and we kind of rebelled against that. So you started getting friction between punks. And what I can say is that those times were very violent between punks themselves.
well,
And again,
yes,
hmm?
yeah. I'd say yes, it was because
I
also,
don't think a lot of people, again, a lot of like younger people might look back and think it was such a happy scene that everybody got on, and it wasn't. And I don't know whether it had a lot to do with in this area, with us being sort of former mining towns as such. There's a lot of tribalism, in the 70s into the 80s, we could go into a town 2 mile down the road and you would stand out and you'd be attacked for like daring to go into somebody else's territories, you know? It was still very much like that, England, at the
Yeah.
time.
I think it was slightly similar because there were certain pubs that were, you know,
No-go areas.
they were like that bunch on their
Yeah.
motorbikes are gonna that's their scene, and you know there was always some girlfriend, you know, being sort of, I don't know, going off with somebody else from a different gang and then massive problems happening. You know, it was still those, this is my pub and this is where we drink and that's not your pub, you know. So
Yeah.
I look back on it. I almost also look back at sort of Sunday league football in the same way as, you know, you got roughly a village with the local lads playing and a few older people. You know, they'd all wake up, you know, on a Sunday morning with a hangover.
Yeah.
But it was very, you know, when you think about it, it was almost like the young men competing against another village with young men who was going to be
Yeah.
the dominant person.
Yeah.
And again, you know, it almost seemed like quite medieval. And I think,
Mhm.
you know, people did get that very tribal quality. This is ours.
Yeah.
You know, Fresnfield are playing Witherstell, and you know there was a sort of hatred towards them. You know, each
Yeah.
other, and who was going to be the captain, who was going to be the hard defender, who was going to be the goalkeeper, and you know, girlfriends, you know, having to be very sort of, you know, like. Yes, having to stick to their one chap from a village, otherwise, you know, all hell would break out if she went off to somebody else in a different
Yeah.
village. I mean, you know, it was very
But I think
primitive.
all of that was like, it's this sense of belonging, isn't it? I
Yes.
don't know if it happens so much now because there's a lot more individualism where people, I don't know, may keep to themselves. There's a lot of people just spend time in bedrooms playing games and
Yeah.
things like that. Where then there was a need to belong to something. So, you know, you would belong to a football crowd, or with music, you had to like sort of jump on a musical trend, which back then you had a good choice, because that's what we look back sometimes. It may be wrong with this nostalgia, but like we look back, and even our small town, there was a time where on a Saturday you would go up to the high street and there would be punks over there. There'd be like your rockers over there, your mods, and your sort of two tone, and then people who might be into Duran Duran, so they might be starting to wear a bit of makeup. Or there was just the young people just seemed, it just seemed colourful. If I can like
Yeah.
say one thing, you know, like I'm not saying it was perfect. It certainly,
No.
you know,
But it
it,
was, I think, that as a form of entertainment, there was going into a city or town and then spending a certain amount of time looking through all the record shops, even if you weren't going to buy something, looking through the clothes shops, even if you weren't going to buy something. But it was almost getting some snack at the market. It was like that was the form of entertainment. There wasn't anything at home because there was
yeah,
no entertainment
yeah.
in one's house. We didn't even have a telephone until about 1979. I mean,
Exactly the same here. And a colour TV that didn't come till was it the mid 70s into the later 70s before we
yes.
had a colour TV.
And there was no, you know, video recorders hadn't sort of appeared in homes until the mid sort of
Into the
80s. So
80s.
yeah, so going into the city, getting on the bus, going into a city or town with a
Yeah,
friend and sort of doing the usual places, you know, like, but a lot of it was just going through records
yeah. Oh, it was as well.
you know,
Heading into Newcastle was again, and we were very mischievous. That seemed to be part of being a punk, was like you have to be mischievous, but we were like that anyway. There's something about the places we're coming from that there's a certain character.
yes.
Um, I don't know what it is, you know, like, but there is one that's like, you know, like some people in Newcastle would say, "Oh, where you coming from?" And they'd say, "Where you coming from?" And they'd say, "Oh, you still eat your young there, don't you?" It was that kind of. So I'm kind of explaining where we're coming from. It has a reputation, and this
Right.
goes back probably to late '60s, early '70s. Boot boys, you know, there was a boot boy trend. This is where the gangs kind of started. The skinheads, the original skinheads.
Yes. But
and
did
it
you, I
travelled
mean,
through the
from
years.
our area, there was mostly sort of a bit more worrying as for like sort of the gene pool. You know, there were certain villages where you think, yeah, there's a bit interbreeding going on around some of these
But I think,
places.
yeah, I think from where I'm coming from, people still say that. So, it's worse now than ever. Like
Oh, is it?
everywhere is, but it's one of those that was left to rot, really. And we were
Yeah.
probably at the beginning of it rotting.
Because there were
But we
certain,
had,
yeah, there were certain villages that when you went through, you know, there was like people just sitting in the front garden staring at you, and you thought, you know, now you realise there were probably cousins who were, you know, having
uh,
children, you know, but they would just spend all day just watching traffic. You know, there was a
mm,
certain amount of that go on for people who, you know, didn't look quite there with it really.
yeah,
So village life, it was fabulous, you know.
yeah,
Yes. So then, so as we trundle into the mid '80s, indie,
yeah,
yeah, but indie pop, you know, like for me,
yeah,
you know, like I sort of got into John Peel probably a bit later than you, but about '83, I guess, and then became obsessed, recording the John Peel show on my trusty TDK D90 cassette. I always just would record it and then listen to it quite a few times to slightly digest it. So I got really into like reggae. I got into the Bundu Boys. I got into even early hip hop, you know,
yeah,
because John Peel played, as well as the usual thing that people thought John Peel played all the time, which actually was very just a part of this show. It wasn't
yeah.
just indie pop, it was quite a lot of other stuff. So, yeah, so how did you, from punk, did you stick with punk into the mid '80s, or were you getting into other
I
musical
mean, I
moments?
don't. I have this habit of digressing, but what I was saying earlier was like it's the John Peel thing, which I felt like I was evolving with. Just things were changing by the week. So you know, one week is to be listening to I don't know if you heard of bands like Disco Zombies. I think and you talk about Ipswich. I'm sure like the Addicts come from Ipswich. They were probably the most famous Ipswich punk band.
The Addicts. I remember the Stupids did. The Addicts.
And I think the Disruptors come from Norwich, I think.
Oh, they did, yes, the
Yeah.
Disruptors, and
So I do remember certain bands. But as well as listening to them, like I say, I would be listening to the Human League, Throb and Gristle, um, and then you'd have Theatre of Hate, that
right,
whole thing, and then Southern Death Cult coming along, Killing Joke. So it all still felt punk. It was just dressed in sort of a different sound, but for me, it was still punk. But even amongst that, leading into the kind of indie sound that we're going to talk about, even from 1978 to 79, we had heard um, television personalities
oh yes, Dan,
who basically are like the godfathers of jangle music as such.
yes,
When you go back to listening to part-time punks, 14 floor, such um, swell maps back that time, there was bands that, and so even Subway Sect kind of influenced Jesus and Mary Chain and people like that. So all that music kind of laid the ground for these later, um, what we sort of indie bands as such, you know. So I was already like listening to that music, and I got into, can't remember what year it was, but very early on, the Church. Do you know the Church
oh
from
yes,
Australia?
from Australia, yes, God, yeah,
Again, they brought this psychedelic thing coming on, psychedelic pop, and they even supported Duran Duran. I don't know if you know this. They were
no,
meant to go on tour with them. This was early Duran Duran, and I think they came off the tour after about 2 dates or something because they had all these screaming girls that were just waiting for Duran Duran. That they didn't want to sit and have to listen to this uh, psychedelic sort of pop band, you know.
yes, the Dale Church, God, they were
So
fantastic.
pop music, this is what I'm saying, that pop music was kind of filtering through. And I'm on the spot here I'm trying to think of like other bands that were coming through at that time, but anything and everything that was coming through that was sounded different, I was appreciating, you know.
Well, I suppose you also had people like the Go Twins and the Comsat Angels and
Cool.
the
Yeah, exactly.
Chameleons were starting to sort of happen as well. Then we'd also had there was like Echo and the Bunnymen,
Yeah.
Julian Cope,
Tear Up Explodes.
U2, and Big Country. They were quite
Yeah.
early, but then I still think that when the Smiths appeared in '83, there was this like, oh, and then this kind of all the other bands like the Mighty Lemon Drops and Mighty Mighty and the Primitives and Darling Buds and
Yeah.
suddenly and Prefab Sprout started and Martin Stevenson and the
Yeah.
Dainties, the Boat to
Mhm.
Bolivia. So it was starting to sort of, yeah, there was definitely another wave of 16 to 18-year-olds who were coming along and
Yeah.
thinking, this is going to be my period. You know,
Yeah.
people at that point, and I suppose I was one of them really. So yeah, it all seemed incredibly exciting, didn't they? And
Mhm.
the NME used to put those cassettes together and have those 7-inch singles that used to be stuck to the front, didn't they? Which also had some, and so did Melody Maker, and they had some quite interesting stuff on there as well. You had the Nightingales and Marky Smith and the Fall, didn't you? And Gang of Four. I mean, there was all these kind of bands coming along as well.
Yeah. Happy Mondays. I do remember a very early version of the Happy Mondays on one of those singles that you mentioned for the Enemy.
Yes, I
I think
can't.
I've still got it, to be honest. I've got a few of those. The Bodines and
Oh yes,
Wolfhounds.
there was there was a whole scene
So
in Manchester and Liverpool as well as Sheffield. I mean, all
yeah.
the big cities, had I guess a couple of clubs. I mean, Liverpool had Eric's, didn't it? And Manchester had several clubs at that
Mhm.
stage, like I don't know, the Boardwalk. Um, but yeah, they were just bigger play. I mean, you talk about Norwich. I mean, we had the Farmers Boys, Serious Drinking,
That's right. I was
and
listening to them as well, you know.
and such bands like that. Oh God, who
So
was
there was a lot of bands
the
like if you
Higsons?
look at
That's it.
Serious
Yes.
Drinking, I mean, they were just a band. You couldn't say that they were any type of band. They had this punky kind of thing going on, but they weren't punk, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
Farmers Boys were a little bit Smiths, but like,
but with the drum machine.
yeah, yeah. Then you had the Three Johns, didn't you? They were a drum machine as well, I think.
Yeah, that's
So for
right.
me, the '80s was a time of just bands. There was just bands. Yeah, you had like a goth, but even then, I'm sure we didn't even had a term called goth because you had Bauhaus, you had Susie and the Banshees, but they didn't say they were
Yeah.
goth. I think
Well, I
all this
suppose
came later.
you had the Bat Cave, didn't you, in London? You had people like Alien Sex Fiend that was there.
Yeah,
And I mean, there were a lot of kind of, I suppose, very dedicated clubs that were around for a couple of years,
yeah,
sometimes short and sometimes long, but they got quite an identity, I suppose. And, it helped develop a scene. And also, I think with this
yeah,
little country of ours, I mean, every city and town had an alternative indie night, and you know, you
yeah,
see those posters now where you'd have three bands with like £2. And so a band could just get on the road and they could just do the circuit, couldn't
yeah,
they? And you had three weekly music papers. You had the John Peel Show, Janice Long, Kid Jensen. I mean, people could do it. But also the other big thing was the unemployment benefit. So you could just,
mhm,
for most people, they could be unemployed and use their free time wisely. Basically go to the pub, really, wasn't it, to happy hour? But they would also, a lot would form bands, and you had job seekers allowance and enterprise allowance schemes, again, that gave people a slight financial stability because you could get housing benefit and your council
yeah,
tax paid and £30 in your pocket or 40. So
yeah.
what
I mean,
not to like?
you could sort of survive on the minimum.
Oh,
And when
oh,
you're young and in a band, you're not thinking ahead. You know, you're not trying to organize anything, but just the next day. You know, really.
basically it was.
Just some rehearsal space, get rehearsing. Let's put a gig on. And
Yes. So when you left school then, did you do your unemployment or did you get a job at that stage?
well, this is it. When I left school, it was probably the worst possible time. I think we're talking 81 here.
Right.
And like I said earlier about the careers office, absolutely nothing. They sent us to a careers office, and basically what they give you was a training scheme,
Oh,
youth
yes.
opportunities, YTS, and then there were
YTS.
YOPs. I think they were called YOPs at one point, community programs.
Yes.
And yeah, it was kind of painting and decorating, gardening for the elderly, age concern. I remember like doing that. And I look back now, and it was fun because like we'd just left school, and it was all just young people, and that you'll be put into groups to go off and decorate a house, and such, or do a garden or whatever,
Yes.
And it was during that period that like I formed the band Task Force with Mick, who was working with me at the time, and this is where like the first band kind of I'd already been in that other band, but that didn't really go anywhere. But like leading into Task Force here, um, this was like 81, 82, and it just seemed like sort of the perfect time. Everything was like happening at that time again through punk. Even though personally, it's weird, but I could be watching Discharge crash one night, but then I'd go and watch I don't know who, Theatre of Hate another night, or even by 83, I'd be watching the Cocteau Twins, the Pale Fountains.
Right. My God,
So
Michael
my
Hayes.
music was just, I think, because if we go right back to the beginning, you're talking about, like musical sort of tastes. Like it started from a pop angle with the Beatles and the Supremes and such. And I think it always stays with you. It's a bit of a shame for these guys who, and I know them now, even personally, who it's punk or nothing. It's hardcore punk. And I just
Right.
think you're missing out on so much because punk has its place. It still has its place for me, but I think for me, it's of a time. It was perfect for the time that we lived in. It helped us get through that time. But even in that time, I still appreciated music as such.
Yes.
But one thing I don't like is sort of, I'm not a fan of rock music, guitar solos, and
Right.
so I'm not into professionalism as such. And that's why, leading back to these indie bands, as you say, um, the musicianship at the very beginning, like, wasn't great with a lot of them. And I like that. I like sort of the shambolic kind of sound to some of these bands, or the recording, the sound. I'm not looking for in my music. I'm not looking for um, sort of perfect soundscape, if you know what I mean. I
Yeah.
don't need the greatest producer, even though I appreciate Martin Rushent and Martin Hannett and everybody else. I appreciate them as producers, but like I love these bands who sort of just manage to get one record out and it sounds really rough and ready. But for me, it like comes across as the most genuine.
Yes.
And like leading on to like the bands that I've been in, I think now I can genuinely sort of say that that's how it was for us, and I can look back and I can hear it in the music. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Am I making sense, or I've
Yeah,
just
no,
gone off on a
absolutely.
tangent?
I was just looking at your the task force on discography actually as well. Yes, so
Yeah,
that was well, I remember I did have friends who used to say, "Oh, I only like their first album of the band because they still hadn't learned to play their instruments properly." And I think he was being a bit snobby about music. But I kind of know that sometimes they capture that moment, don't they?
yeah,
Everything is in that recording, and then suddenly after that, I know a few bands would release their first album on an indie label, and it was like, oh, this is brilliant. And then they get signed to a major like Virgin or Warner's, and then it's like, oh God, this sounds really predictable. It kind of, you know,
Because especially during the 80s, they brought producers in, and sometimes producers brought the particular technology. So a lot of
yes.
the 80s is a technological kind of sound, isn't it? Like the latest sort of,
Well, the Trevor Horn production
yeah,
sound just
stuff
dominated
like
it
that, you know?
because we had ABC and Frankie and all those bands, and
Yeah. They don't
yeah,
age very well. Whereas
and
you can listen to a band like, I don't know, even listening to the Cocteau Twins or New Model Army, they still sound like themselves.
yeah, I didn't really like that 80s production that we saw on Top of the Pops. It was all a little bit too, it was too kind of, like, I don't know, soulless, I suppose. I mean, I know everyone loves Talk, but I often think, God, I wish they hadn't produced it kind of like with that sound. I'm sure it does sound okay, but I just can't get over the production, which is just too, it's just too much, really. It's, you know, I just like that sort of organic indie, or just more of an organic sound, really. Let's face it.
I mean, I've only like sort of started to think now, and specifically because of like this interest in this single, which I think you've heard, that
Yes.
the guitarist Andy's son Dan has like resurrected really from the ether, you know, like we had boxes of these records which we'd just given up on all those years ago. And all of a sudden, like there's an audience there who appreciates the sound of it for what it is. And I'm beginning to like appreciate it again. As like way back then, like I was really disappointed. We were all disappointed in like the recording of it as such, you know. I mean, there's a tale in that, but like yeah, like looking back now, and I can see what people see in it.
Yes. So after Task Force, which lasted 2 years,
Yeah,
into about 1980s, was it about
four,
84, 85?
2 to 4, really.
Yeah. Then did you have a period of not being in the band, or did the 15th come along quite soon after that?
Um, Quite soon, but what it was myself and the bass player of Task Force, because the guitarist had joined the army and it kind of just fell apart. And we kind of tried to keep it going.
Yes.
But even at that time, we were like we were wanting to move to a different sound. We were beginning to anyway by the end of that band, because people were getting better at with their instruments as such, and the music was reflected in what we were listening to as well, like, so you were getting these new sounds sort of coming through. And so me and David, um, we didn't like have a band called the 15, but we just kept getting musicians in to try and help us just keep on sort of rehearsing songs, and just keep going as a band. And one of the hardest things is always a drummer. I don't know if it was for everybody back then, but drummers were just so hard to come by.
Yes.
So we couldn't get like this full band going quickly enough because of a drummer. So we even like introduced a drum machine, we were getting into that. And it was just rehearse. And then somehow Andy, who became part of the 15th, joined us. And then we just started jamming some more, and it became much more of this indie sound that we talk about now.
Yes.
Because I think that's what was going on around us at the time. We were kind of joining in, but we always still retained us, because I think in us was still that sort of punky sound as such. Probably leading more back to the likes of the Swell Maps, who weren't punk but came out of that whole thing. And if you remember, sort of the Swell Maps would do like home taping as such. So they would just do some crazy recordings like in the bedroom or something. And we started doing that as well. So we probably spent a couple of years where we would just be making cassettes and writing songs and putting them down and sending them off. Because back then you thought you could just send a cassette off and somebody would listen to it. But bit naive, you know, but like,
Yeah. Well,
you just thought, I've got an idea, somebody wants to hear this, so you'd be putting it in an envelope, sending it off to a record label. And funnily enough, we did get like some interest. I always remember, I don't know if you know a label called Midnight Music. I think
yes,
Sad
that,
Lovers and Giants were on
and I think Blythe Power on
with it.
Midnight, and I think that's been bought up by Cherry Red now, Midnight Music.
Right.
But
Yeah, you could be right.
yes,
I think
sadly,
even, you know, even no matter how rough the recordings we were making, people were showing some kind of an interest, so that like spurred us on, you know. And then we kind of evolved, and like we got more musicians in the band. But again, we were like just getting drummers temporarily. We just couldn't hold on to a drummer, you know. And
yeah,
we were just
you
doing
went for
recordings.
3 drummers actually, two called David, and Gladstone.
Yeah, Jed,
Yes,
and we omitted one. There was another guy called Ashley. He was in for a while, and they
right.
would come do so many rehearsals, and then they would be gone. They wouldn't come back, and this just went on and on, you know. So
Yes,
the band as such, like, even though we rehearsed, recorded, played gigs, it just fluctuated so much, and it was never solid enough, you know, to go forth as such. And I think it was um, like finally we like sort of managed to use the demo that we made to put out on this record, and this was only done because I'd applied for a Prince's
oh, Princess Trust.
Trust grant. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, and was that a
Somebody
thousand
had told me,
pound?
and I think I probably got something like that to produce 300 records or something like that. So we sent all the tapes off and said, "Can you just stick that onto a record?" And but that's all we could afford. We couldn't afford sleeves or anything, or even labels. We just got
Right.
the basic blank label.
That's fantastic. So this is the Inside Out and
Yeah,
Rumours of Rain.
yeah,
So this is so where did you record? Was this recorded in Northern Recording
yeah.
Studios?
And again, this is it's all controversial because it goes back to like when we were in task force as well. We used to rehearse there. They didn't have a recording studio at the time, but it was something that was set up like with the closure of the steelworks, and they were still fighting for the pits to stay open, the miners' strike as such. So they had this thing called Coal Not Dole.
Oh
I
yes.
think I think they were funded money in order to like set up these community organisations. And, you know, so part of it was to have some rehearsal space for bands and then a recording studio. And it just started off. To be honest, the first time we recorded there, it was just an 8-track. So we've got some recordings on an 8-track, which are terrible, but like the songs still sound quite good, but just very, very primitive, you know, the recording. And then they finally got round to getting a 24-track. But the people who ran it they were the type, they were a lot older than us, and their musical tastes were um, again like blues and the likes.
I
So
think
they
it
had
was, I
no
thought you were going to
interest
say
in
they were a
us.
bit more proggy or something like that.
Well, they weren't even that. I think it was more blues, and like they just did not have an interest, and they didn't have an understanding of what we were asking for. So when we were recording, say, "Can you do this? Can you do that?" They couldn't do it. And
Mm.
what was worse, on the day of recording that single was Jed had been the drummer up to that point, and I can't honestly remember now, but he just wasn't there on the day of recording. So what are we going to do? We haven't got a drummer, and there was just another guy called Dave, and we called him Shed Builder
Yes.
because, well, basically because if you listen to the sound of the drum, it's just like building a shed. He did nothing. He basically he was hanging around the studio. He was somebody who just knew the people in the studio. So we were desperate, and we got word to him, like, can you play the drums? And he could. can you go and get your drums? Well, I'll go and get me drums. And he came, brought the drums in. And obviously you could only listen to the track a couple of times. It's a pretty basic track, but if you listen to it, that was one of the things that was really disappointing because he just did the beat. But what's worse still is, and I can't remember why, but in the studio they decided the snare didn't sound right, so they over every beat of the snare they would put an electronic drum beat over it,
Right.
and that's what made it sound like you're just hitting a hammer, hitting a nail with a hammer.
Yes. That is
So all that was
disappointing.
really, it was just disappointing, and again, I don't think people appreciate back then when you had recording time, it was limited to how much you could afford. So you say like you could have 5 hours for £90 or something like that. And you know, money was really tight still back then
Yes.
for us. We were still young. We didn't have money. So if you collected, let's say, a £90 or £100, we could get so many hours. And we had to get things down. And I always remember it always took so much of that time to just set up, you know. I mean, one of the guys, like Simon Maps, the lead guitarist on the tracks, um, he would literally, he's just his own person, you know. He like sort of would take so long tuning his guitar up. I couldn't understand it, you know. Like, what was
Yes,
he
it's quite
doing, you know?
infuriating, actually. That's possibly one of the
Yeah,
most. Yeah, I don't know if you remember watching it, Bad News,
yeah.
before, and there was the scene with
I
Spider,
know. With
who was the drummer,
yeah,
and just saying,
bit
trying to
louder, bit
set.
louder,
Oh God, yes, a bit,
bit louder.
just a bit. That is
Yeah,
such a
just
great.
a
I
little
love
bit louder.
just a little. Yeah, I just love
But it can.
Colin.
I think that was a good. It was kind of a good way of like explaining what it was like to be in a band. Like, there's certainly
Great.
a rock band because I think it could be pretentious. You know, we weren't like that. I think our worst crime was like, again, is it because of where we're coming from? But like, we didn't take ourselves seriously enough.
Right.
We're jokers. We're still, even though we're, if you listen to the tracks on the record, they're very thoughtful and melancholic. But as people, we're still very jokey, and we're still those mischievous kids that we were when we were young punks, you know. And put
Yes.
us in a studio, it's like it's still fascinating. I'll always say it to people, like, they'll not get that now because they've obviously got the technology, they've got just the ability to like record in their own time.
I know
Where
this is
for
true.
us, we were limited to how much, you know, like sort of we could go in there and do it. And when you went in, it was still like it was fascinating, you know, to go into the studio with this big desk and these big speakers. And when they played it back to you, it always sounded fantastic because coming through them big speakers, like either side of the mixing desk, sounded great. But when you'd finally recorded the tracks and gone home and played them on your little tape recorder, it didn't sound as good.
Mm.
But it was
Yes.
too late.
Well, it was all over then. Yeah, there was an amazing amount of bands who would record from midnight to 7 in the morning, when the studio, someone would say, look, you can use the studio at that time for a very cheap rate. But yeah, so a lot of records got recorded. So when the single came out and you had 300 pressed, what happens to the band? Do you play a few live shows to promote it? Or do you not last
Yeah,
that long?
yeah, we got like what you'd say like a lend of another drummer. We still never had a permanent drummer, so we got a lend of another drummer. And you'd play some gigs, and the record really it became more of like a novelty, just having it. It was just the idea we've made a record, but I think its intention was really to send it out and use it as some form of demo, because I think by then somebody had said it'll be better than a cassette. They get so many cassettes, they just throw them in the bin.
Yeah.
But a record might get played, it might get listened to, and sending it to John Peel, he would play it. So he played that one, and I managed to like get a Task Force song played on John Peel as well, which for a lot of people, that's when you've really made it, you know.
Boy, I think this is true. And a John Peel session would have been amazing. So, yes. But
So
then,
yeah, like sort of so releasing that, it was mainly sent away to act as some kind of demo, you know, to labels to see. And for me, yeah, it didn't sound great, but for me, I think demos should always be like the potential, not the finished act. For me, I think they should be able to look and say that sounds like a good enough song. We could maybe do something with that, but we weren't getting that really, to be honest. And I don't know. I've always had this opinion, and again, this goes back to like being in task force as well. We we would never try and sound like somebody else, and I think a lot of bands felt like they had to go and sound like somebody else to fit the label.
yes.
If you know what I mean, it was a time like that. So in the punk period, Task Force was not a straightforward shouty band like sort of Discharge Exploited, because some of us in the band had come from the 70s, so we'd always liked some of the pop sounds that came out of that. Like there was, I don't know if you know about the Northern Irish scene of the late 70s.
No. God.
Uh, it all centers around the Good Vibrations label, which brought you the Undertones' Teenage Kicks.
Oh.
Well, if you look that up, there was a film called Good Vibrations, and it was about the shop, which was
Oh,
Terry Mooney.
yes. Based in Belfast.
Yes. And there was a scene at that time, and if you listen to any of those punk bands from Belfast, they've all got pop sensibility.
Yes.
Rufrex and The Idiots and Outcasts and Rudy, they're all sort of very poppy punk. And I think we kind of carried a little bit of that with us. So when we were trying to get a record deal as such, we were kind of, we weren't playing the game, but we couldn't, we were just playing what we wanted to play. So
Yes.
we were out of time, really. And I think with the 15th, it was a little bit like that, because lots of bands were beginning to sound like other bands. You know, the Jesus and Mary chain had happened. So I think there was starting to be bands coming through that were using that sound, My Bloody Valentine, I think. And, you know, they were starting to use feedback and,
Yeah, there was a bit of a shoegazy scene, wasn't
yeah.
there?
So you had that, or you had other bands like who were really going for a very 60s vibe. Bands like The Loft and
Oh, yeah.
the June Brides and people like that. There were
There was a the
Pastels, yeah.
yeah, there was that new Paisley scene, wasn't there? That was, quite something really.
So I
Yeah.
think to our detriment, you know, and like I say, I carry this now and realise that, like, in both bands, I always say we were on the outside of everything, which is from the one of my most favourite songs, "Shot by Both Sides" magazine.
Oh, yes. God,
And
and
I always use that. If I could write a book, I would like call it that, On the Outside of Everything, because I think we were, as a punk band we were, as an indie band we were. And that's what makes it all the more special, that like there's people who can hear it now, like 30 odd year later, and kind of get it, you know? And it's really just fantastic, you know, that like um it is something now, where back then it was a disappointment.
yes. But then Ian Curtis, I remember going to that exhibition in Manchester, and there's a from that first Joy Division album where he's absolutely horrified by the sound and thinks it's been ruined. But obviously, yes, little did he know how we all sort of would love
I
that
know.
record. So yeah, so then once the band did the album and did some live dates, was there ever kind of an idea of recording again, or was it a case that everyone had just decided this is the 90s, we're going to break up?
I think it was very much like the Task Force era where it slowly but surely disintegrated. But I think we were kind of leading up to the late 80s, and I think at that time we'd lost sort of a couple of the members. Like I say, we were like sort of drifting a bit, but the main sort of band was myself, David, the bass player who had been in Task Force, and Andy. So us three had kind of started the 15th and ended the
Yes.
15th. But we got another second guitarist in, and we started doing some more stuff with a drum machine. Again, still hard to get a drummer. So we said, can we settle with a drum machine? But at this point, I think the guy who we brought in was a bit younger than us, and we kind of allowed some of his musical tastes to come in, and that was the likes of Sugar,
Oh
Bob
God,
Mould, can you
Bob
remember?
Mould, yes. Oh God, yes, Husker Du and
So we were covering something like that. Porno for Pyros.
oh yeah,
We did one of theirs. We even did a Camel cover.
really?
Camel, this song didn't sound like Camel. I can't remember
Oh
what it was, but it was a very
Camel.
unusual song which suited us at the time.
God, I'll have to try and find that.
I can't remember what it was, but it didn't sound like Camel.
Oh,
It was one of them tracks, a bit like King Crimson. Um, you can listen to most of them, and it's prog. But then
yeah,
they had, I'm trying to think of what track was on Court of the Crimson King.
yeah,
There's
I
one
can't,
track which sounds quite different, a little
yeah.
bit punky.
Camel.
Can't
Oh,
remember it, but
yes,
I
I'll have to
think those
try.
bands kind of had a habit of doing that. They'd throw in this like odd track, and that seemed to be the best one for us. But yeah, we were doing stuff like that, and we were playing some gigs. We even did some like outdoor things. But I think at that point, Andy certainly, he was the first one to kind of say, "This is not my scene," weren't into Porno for Pyros and people like that. So he stepped aside. So it was left with the three of us. We brought in, through this other guy who, second guitarist, he brought in a drummer finally and another guitarist. And this was kind of round about the time this whole grunge thing was taken off.
Yes,
And again, me and David kind of allowed these to bring their influences in. And so they had us jumping in with this grungy type. So we got like a little bit harder. I mean, musicianship, it sounded tight, but I didn't really have any sort of uh, investment in it, if that's the right
right.
word. I sang along. I started shouting again. I thought that was 10 years ago. I don't want to be shouting now. I mean, all my lyrics and everything had become different. They were much more introspective as such, existential, and this. And I wasn't attracted to the grunge. I'm still to this day. I can like a couple of Nirvana tracks, but I can't see the attraction.
Yes,
It's not for me. Soundgarden and Mudhoney and Dinosaur Jr. I don't like. For me personally, I don't like this whole Americanization of things. I think I'm much more European in my sort of likes of music.
yes.
I don't know if that makes sense, but that's why
Yeah, no,
post
absolutely.
punk meant more to me because it was a very European sort of soundscape.
Yes.
So this whole sort of grunge thing, no. So we carried on for a bit. We recorded and we did play gigs, but it kind of dissolved. It was like I'd really like had it by then. Music wasn't doing sort of. Oh, I tell you what I've done. I've gone and jumped ahead of myself here.
Oh,
Before that band,
Yes.
Before that band, when Andy left, there was myself, David, and Wayne, who was the second guitarist. We
Yes.
got a drum machine. We still have the drum machine anyway. And rather than play the songs that we were playing at that time, we decided to go and experiment a bit with electronics. And so we made some recordings, just recording. I don't think we ever gigged, but we was just recording. And we kind of, now looking back, it sounded a little bit like The Beloved.
Oh yes, my God! You went into was it Sunrise and
Yeah,
yeah, kind of. There's some they did just some really
like
stunning.
Happiness as such, that whole.
And they started as an indie band 'cause I know they've
They
appeared
did
on a few
they were
compilations.
very New Order Smith sounding.
Yeah, and then they got it. So you had your
Yeah.
sort of ambient rave.
So we
The,
did stuff under that kind of guise anyway. And that's when we thought, right, we need to kind of put a band together. And then we put this band which become more grunge like, And like I
yeah.
say, as time went on, I kind of thought it's not doing what music had always done for me. And I can't pretend, I can't just sort of play music for the
Yeah.
sake of it. And in that band, like that's what I was doing. The songs I was singing. That's why I don't even have any of the recordings that we did because I just wasn't interested in listening to them back.
Well, so then, yeah, and then in the sort of so that the 90s then was when you finished with the band, and that was the
Yeah,
end.
yeah. I mean, I just sort of settled down, have a family, um, and I think it was kind of. I'm trying to think of when early 2000s. I was still listening to music. Don't get me wrong, but I think I was never into Britpop one bit. I mean, I didn't mind so much of Manson. There was a band called
Oh
Manson,
yes, I remember
Wide
Manson.
Open Space as such. Um, they were okay, but like the whole Blur Oasis, to this day, I still can't take it
Yes.
seriously. And it's obviously songs of a generation. That's what people love. Again, not for me. Too contrived. The whole thing, Elastica. I'm sure they tried to sound like Wire. There
Right.
was
Yeah.
Republica, all these bands. No, it just wasn't for me. I think I was probably listening more to. I like soundtracks, and so a lot of this music that was come through, like chill out music. Um, I don't know if you've heard like the bar Cafe Del Mar.
Oh yes, I remember these
So you get them
compilations.
compilations, and it's very lo-fi kind of sort of trip hoppy,
Yes.
chilled out, sort of watching the sun come up in Ibiza type of music. So I
Yeah.
preferred all that kind of thing. So rather than any current trend, whatever was going on, and a bit of dance music, like, and then leading into the 2000s, that's when I decided, like, I don't know, I've kind of always wanted to write a book about
Right.
sort of post punk, and because that meant probably the most to me that whole period because so much went on. And I started kind of doing that, but then I thought I'd love to do my own radio show. How do I do that? And so I looked about, and there was like a local. Well, it wasn't that local, like, but it was near
Mm.
enough that I could reach about 25 mile away. Um,
Oh.
so I started sort of putting together a program. I called it Another Music in a Different Kitchen.
Yes, I
And
see.
so I did this for 15 years, and it was basically punk and post-punk and reggae, very, very much in the vein of John Peel. That's
Yeah.
how I wanted to present it. Um, and it really caught on. And it was great to be like people listening to it in Argentina and all over Europe, and then in this country, like ex-punks, old punks, like hearing these songs again. But before you know it, there was more and more radio shows starting to appear. So I think
Yes.
people were starting, and YouTube has really taken off. And I think the listening audience, you'll know yourself and what you do that um, it's quite difficult to get a listening audience in this day and age because they feel that they've got um, sort of the ability to go and get it. They
Yeah.
flip a switch. They don't need you to present it to them, you know. But I found this is where I found the Europeans were much better. And they still to this day they really still love hearing that rare sort of post-punk sound, like electronic sound. And what they do is they still have clubs in that where you've still got 18, 19-year-olds that are still dancing to like tracks from 1978 or 1981, 82. Rare songs, you know. They love it. In this
Yes.
country, they're not so much. I think in this country, people want things familiar to them. That's what I found in radio anyway, that I would get requests for like, oh, can you play this Buzzcock song or this Clash song? And I'm thinking, no, I want to play this Denizen song or something, you know, who's Denizen? But listen to it.
Yes, I know, it's weird, isn't it, really?
So I did that
Yes.
for 15 years, and in that time, I did the interviews, like I said, and started like actually making a documentary film with. I don't know if you know the punk band Penetration.
Yes.
Have you heard of them? Well,
Yeah.
the original guitarist Gary, he was in from '77 to '78. I interviewed him as one of the subjects, you know, like, and he kind of we got sort of talking, and he had the availability of a camera as such, and said like, do you want to start doing interviews with camera, you know, like, and let's make a little film.
Right.
We started making a documentary, so we started filming people like Vic Goddard and um, can't remember his name from the Fallen Leaves, you know.
Oh, yes, The Fallen
Yeah,
Leaves. I have done that.
yeah, and various people anyway from like the old sort of punk, post-punk period.
Yeah.
Um, Martin Brahma from The Fall,
Oh,
we did him.
yes.
We were going to do Jane Casey from Liverpool.
Yeah.
So we were like we were putting all this together, and in the meantime, he still had a band, and that's where he invited me to join a band. So I got back into this. Is the first time I got back into a band in a year, probably 15 years. But in this one, I was just bringing um, like experimental videos and noises. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something completely different. So for was it a year or a couple of year, we played gigs, records. So we supported the likes of the Nightingales, Band of Holy Joy, Theatre of Hate, the pop group. So we did, you
That's
know, some tiny
fantastic.
gigs.
Yes.
But then I think he was preferring to go more into guitar-based music and that. I think the experimental side had run its course with him, you know, and that's all I wanted to do. I've always been the same. I want to do something like a little bit different. I don't just want to be another. It's like when I say tribute band, I would never be in a tribute band or anything like that. I couldn't just for the
No.
sake of playing music. Where people just say, "Yeah, listen, I'll play music because I just love it." Even at this age, if I was going to do something, I would want to do something challenging. You know, I couldn't just go through the motions.
Yes, it would be very tricky. So does that mean, so where are you at the moment then? Are you making music at the moment, or is it?
I mean, for a while I did. I was making experimental music and just sort of putting stuff on YouTube with experimental videos, and it was avant-garde, you know. It was noise and things like that. Um, I think I just again, it's very difficult to kind of get heard or to just get into a circle.
Yes,
So
this
I
is
think
true.
I just concentrated on videos. I still edit videos. I'm not saying I make them. I kind of mash up
Right.
in a very kind of situationist way. If you know about the
Right.
situationist,
Yes.
so something called detonement, which is like taking a video and using it for something completely different from what it was originally made for. So I do things like that. So I mash videos up and I started making them for musicians and bands. And I kind of still do that.
Oh,
So I
fantastic.
like to keep being creative without, I'm not going to be anything. I don't do anything for money or it's just because I think ever since the punk period, I, there's like something creative in us.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, it is just for me to be creative, not for me to, like I say, to ever be successful at anything. I think that's another thing. That's what's a surprise here is like who you're talking to now is somebody who never made it compared to the people you normally interview, which I've noticed it's all these people that made it in a certain way. I
Yes.
think I'm the great underachiever compared to the achievers that you know. So this story is kind of it. I'm hoping that it didn't sound chaotic because I
No, my
know
God,
when I start talking, I am
it
chaotic
all makes sense. It all
because
makes
there's so much to bring into it. I think I ramble on a lot because I try and like bring in so much.
yes.
I don't want to leave anything out, but
What
obviously there's still so much left out. That's why I've always wanted to write a book because I think there's enough there, you know, to like to have some interest. I think
Well, I
that
think
the
there is.
book
No,
is
I think there is. I think there's a lot of interest. Yeah, a lot. You've probably seen a lot of people have been writing their books, haven't they? Actually,
mm,
and putting their archive. And I think it's good. It's a way that people have, processed their stuff, but also, I mean, it's explaining a bit of history that. The 80s used to be explained in a rather simplistic way. And I thought,
yeah,
that's a bit
yeah,
strange. That wasn't my 80s at all. And then other people have started telling their story, and you think, oh, yeah, that's a bit more realistic. So I think
mm,
the more people that put their story out there, the more you get an idea of the 80s. It wasn't just about sort of, Duran Duran and Sade and Live Aid and
definitely
the
not.
and the Blitz Kids and the Faith
Yeah,
magazine.
yeah.
Because I remember that was like that wasn't quite my 80s at all. It wasn't even slightly my 80s.
I
So
mean, there were
yeah,
some great bands. I mean, people don't mention. I would like to mention like bands like Pig Bros and Bogshed.
Bogshed. You love Bogshed.
Do you know what I mean? Like people and the Membranes even
Yeah,
and
or Stump,
Tools You Can Trust.
Big Flame. We love them all.
There's Inca Babies. You
Oh
know all these
yes.
bands. The
Um,
'80s was a really really good time.
yeah,
Um,
I think you need to write your book actually. It would be fascinating. It would be good. You just have to sort of try and get that structure, don't you? That's
I
the
think
key.
it's like for me, it's like about sort of it's trying to bring this because most of the time, like we're talking about, like the '70s, the '80s, when it's music based, it's coming from these people who actually made it. But for me, there's so many people like me who jumped in a band, and like I always say, they were only famous in their own postcode. They were never heard out of the postcode, and it's such a
Yes.
shame that like people get left out of the story because all these magazines, all they ever want to talk about is the Clash or the Sex Pistols again. They're kind of regurgitated every 10 years for a new generation.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, this is why I started the radio show because I wanted to let people know there was so much more to punk music, post punk music than these bands. Yeah, you'll hear the Gang of Four, but like apart from the Gang of Four, you know, there was like bands like the Disco Zombies and Denizens and such, you know, like Ideal Husbands. So many bands, everything's worth checking out, you know.
Yes.
And I just find that the Europeans are much better at it. They just
Yeah.
have a genuine thirst for old music. And I think this is what's very good about people who are buying into this 15th single now. Quite a bit of it is coming from abroad.
Yeah, that must be interesting seeing where it gets sent to.
Well, I don't know if anyone knows, but like with the interest in it and the records are selling, we've got another label that are interested in reissuing it.
Oh, fantastic.
So that is fantastic, you know what I mean? It'll be done properly and distributed properly. So, and with Task Force, I'm busy at the minute. There's an album being put together by a
Right.
London label, so we're getting that out as well. So both these things, it's all happening at once. Where,
God.
yeah, I'm into my 60s now, but like, it's this stuff that I was doing as a 17-year-old and a little bit
Yes.
older is still a little bit relevant, you know.
I know it's weird to
It's
think
nice.
it's weird to think it's 45 years ago.
Yeah,
Isn't it?
I know.
It's weird.
Don't like to think about it too much,
No,
but
it's too weird, isn't it? But yes, I think it's great. I think archiving is really good because at least once you've archived it, it's there, isn't it? It's
but that's it. And I mean, who knows in 20, 30, 40-year time, there's other generations that I think music does seem to go around in circles.
yeah. Well,
And I think more than ever, you know, like people are really interested. I know there's a lot of people just collect things. I understand that. But I think a lot of people really do like old things and listening to an old song. I don't know. They must feel something from it. I'd like them to explain. I would love a conversation with people who listen to this record, and I'd love to hear what they're hearing it. Do you know what I
mm,
mean? Which would sort of help me to listen with new ears because I now than like what I did.
yes, I know. Well, at least at least you can listen to it and have a bit more kindness or fondness for it than
Yeah.
they originally. But look, well, Trevor, thank you ever so much. That's been amazing, and I'm gonna have to go to bed soon. Actually, I'm getting up so early at the moment. You wouldn't
Yeah,
believe it.
me too.
It's the I know the dreaded. Oh, good, it's 4:30. I'm so pleased, but it does mean I fade a bit. But look, thank you ever so much for agreeing to this. This has been incredible, and it's been fascinating listening
Like I
to.
say, I hope it's not too chaotic because
No, my God,
in my ears, I'm thinking I've gone all over the place.
No, God, it's all good stuff. But look, thank you for this time for your time. I'll let
Yeah,
you
thank
go.
you.
And yes, I look forward to hearing more from Task Force, which will be an interesting one. So
Yeah,
it's cool. Okay, look, I'll let you go. But thanks
right.
again for your time.
Thank you. Thank you
Take
very much.
care. See you
Okay.
later.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye for now. Bye.
And that was me in conversation with Trevor Johnson, talking about his life in music with the 15th and also Press Gang. This has been the C86 show, David Eastaugh. Have a great week. Stay safe.